The person who chose to distance themselves from you, the one who pulled back because this bond felt completely off limits, is now entering a quiet and deeply unsettling period of realization. Rare connections never arrive with loud announcements or dramatic confessions. They move silently beneath ordinary thoughts until they reshape everything from within. Before either person fully understands what is happening, the energy has already shifted and something permanent has begun. This is exactly the kind of bond people try to escape, not because it lacks meaning, but because its intensity feels impossible to face. For months, or even years, they convinced themselves that walking away was the only logical and practical choice to protect their routine, public image, and carefully built life. They repeated those reasons until they believed them, but they overlooked one fundamental truth. Avoiding you never weakened the connection. It only made it stronger, deeper, and impossible to ignore. Now an inner shift has left them restless, deeply intrigued, and powerless in the way genuine emotional honesty always does. If this forbidden connection story resonates, hit like so others can receive this message too. Be completely clear about one fact. They did not avoid you because you were unimportant. Believing that only makes you question your own worth when the truth is far different. People do not walk away from what means nothing. They walk away from what threatens everything they have built and the identity they have spent years protecting. This connection with you was never simple, casual, or easy to explain. It never asked for permission, followed conventional rules, or waited for anyone's approval. It existed completely outside logic and normal expectations, which terrified someone who built their life on control, order, and predictability. Now they are forced to face the reality they tried so hard to escape. The distance they created, the walls they built, and the excuses they repeated never erased the bond. Instead, that space became filled with reflection, longing, and a realization they were never prepared to face. They now see you as someone who permanently changed their emotional world. What they feel now is raw, undeniable, and impossible to explain with logic. Even so, they may still resist it, caught between what they cannot deny and the fear of stepping beyond the boundaries they spent years enforcing. This is the kind of bond that cannot be controlled or fully understood, and that is exactly why it frightens them. It quietly remains in the deepest corners of their awareness, refusing to disappear until it is finally acknowledged. When they face it completely, the realization will be impossible to avoid. You are not someone they can forget, dismiss, or simply walk away from. You have become a permanent presence that changed them in ways they never expected, a truth that refuses to break under fear or logic. This bond never fit their plans, values, timing, or responsibilities, and every attempt to force it into a safe explanation failed. Instead of fading with distance, it only grew stronger in quiet but undeniable ways. Comment avoided if you've ever had someone pull away from a deep bond like this. The more they fought this connection, the more they realized how different they felt whenever you were near. Their usual defenses faded without effort, while past conversations replayed long after they ended. Even the silence you shared echoed deeper than words ever could. Your simple presence touched a part of them they were not ready to face, and that overwhelming intensity convinced them they had to make a choice. At the time, they truly believed distance was the only answer. They created distance not because they were indifferent or lacked feelings, but because the connection became more than they could handle. It felt quietly forbidden, disrupting the peace and stability they had built. The timing was wrong, emotional availability was limited, and family expectations, responsibilities, and obligations made everything feel far too complicated. Facing the connection would have meant accepting truths they were not yet ready to acknowledge. Whenever they were with you, they felt completely exposed, as though every hidden part of their heart was brought into the light. You never demanded anything, chased them, manipulated them, or gave ultimatums. Your genuine presence alone unsettled them in the best possible way, breaking through the walls they had spent years building. They realized that allowing this bond to continue would require changing the comfort, routines, and identity they were not prepared to leave behind. Everything they knew felt at risk if they surrendered to the truth of what they felt. So instead of facing it, they ran. Avoidance became their way of regaining control over emotions that no longer felt safe. Pulling away acted as a shield, convincing them they were being rational and doing what was necessary. Every excuse about needing more time, bad timing, or life being too complicated was simply a way to avoid the vulnerability that being close to you required. But they were never running from emptiness. They were running from something too powerful to control or explain. The more they resisted this connection, the stronger it became, and the clearer their feelings grew. Small moments they once overlooked began replaying in their mind, lingering long after every interaction had ended. Their effort to stay in control only deepened the emotional pull they were trying to escape. A glance, a gentle smile, or the warmth in your voice became impossible for them to forget. Every act of avoidance only confirmed how deeply your presence mattered, leaving them caught between fascination, longing, and quiet panic. The bond remained unspoken but became impossible to deny, growing stronger because it had been resisted for so long. They believed distance would weaken the connection, restore control, and erase its intensity. Type epiphany. If you're ready to hear how their realization is unfolding right now, they believed creating distance, leaving your world, and ignoring the connection would restore order to their carefully structured life. Instead, the opposite happened. The harder they tried to stay away, the more present you became in their thoughts. Memories, emotions, and quiet reminders surfaced without warning, and even in moments that should have brought peace, your presence remained like a shadow they could not escape. As they kept avoiding the connection, you appeared in places they never expected. Songs awakened emotions they thought were gone, quiet moments filled with thoughts of you, and ordinary details suddenly carried deep meaning. The strategy they trusted stopped working, and that was when the epiphany slowly began. It was a quiet realization that reached far beyond anything logic could explain. They realized they were not truly afraid of losing you, but of losing themselves. Every attempt to suppress their feelings only pulled them further from a truth they were finally becoming ready to face. This realization came gradually, through lonely moments, quiet emptiness, and days that felt incomplete without you. Even relationships and achievements that once brought fulfillment now left them with a lingering sense that something essential was missing. Slowly, they began to ask themselves the very questions they had been running away from for a long time. They wondered why nothing felt the same anymore, why they continued to think about you every single day, and why the moments spent without you felt smaller, dimmer, and far less real. In this growing awareness, they finally started to see the undeniable truth of the situation. They had not been distracted by your existence. They had been completely awakened by it. You were never a temporary temptation, a simple distraction, or a mistake to be regretted. You were something far more profound, acting as a clear mirror that reflected back a version of themselves that was truly alive, highly authentic, and emotionally awake. In your presence, the defenses they had spent a lifetime building came crashing down like fragile walls under a powerful tide. They now see that walking away from you was never an act of wisdom or caution. It was a quiet form of self-abandonment, because in trying to avoid you, they had actually walked away from the exact version of themselves they most wanted to embrace. A version that felt honest, present, and capable of profound connection is what you offered. And now, when they finally confront the truth, the reflection of themselves that you had revealed is impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, and impossible to forget. The epiphany hits slowly, like sunlight breaking through clouds long after a storm has passed. Comment, mirror. If this person's avoidance showed you parts of yourself too, they now see with piercing clarity the consequences of their avoidance. The distance they thought would protect them did nothing of the sort. It delayed the inevitable, postponed the confrontation with a truth they could no longer run from. They finally understand that avoidance was never a shield. It was a postponement of awakening, and that awakening is both humbling and transformative. It is in this quiet, undeniable recognition that they realize you were never someone to fear, never someone to resist. You were always someone who illuminated what they were afraid to see within themselves. They finally understand why your presence felt so different, why every conversation with you lingered long after it ended, and why no one else has touched them in the same way since. The intensity they experienced wasn't the result of forbidden circumstances. It was the reason the connection felt forbidden in the first place. It existed outside of their carefully constructed boundaries because it threatened to awaken a part of life they hadn't yet dared to live. And now, in quiet moments of reflection, they are carrying emotions they don't quite know how to release. Not loud, dramatic longing, but a subtle, persistent awareness. Not frantic obsession, but quiet regret. Emotions that linger, difficult to name, impossible to ignore. They feel guilt for disappearing without explanation, curiosity about who you've become, and a creeping fear that they missed their chance. There is hope too, the fragile hope that they haven't lost you completely, but above all, they feel respect. They recognize the strength you displayed, the patience, the dignity, the refusal to chase or beg, your ability to hold space without bitterness, to allow distance without resentment, leaves a quiet, haunting impression. This part of them knows they were confronted by something mature, wise, and unshakable. Your presence reshaped how they see connection, respect, and self-awareness. This epiphany arrives now because true realizations rarely appear in chaos. They emerge in stillness, when distractions fade and life slows enough to force honest reflection. Something in their world changed, and in that silence, they could no longer avoid what they had been running from. Your presence returned to their mind with complete clarity. They did not avoid you because the connection was wrong, but because it was real. Once they recognized that truth, it could no longer be ignored or undone. What happened was not the loss of this connection, but growth. You outgrew the version of them that was ruled by fear and unable to meet you with the honesty you deserved. Whether they reach out or remain silent, they have been permanently changed by your presence. Share this with someone who needs to know their presence left a permanent mark. You became a turning point, a quiet lesson that transformed them without force or ceremony. Your steady presence and emotional maturity mean that if they return, it will be with humility, awareness, and respect instead of fear or avoidance. And if they never return, your impact remains unchanged because the lesson continues within them. Some connections are never meant to be rushed. They unfold through reflection, clarity, and emotional growth, and you were never invisible in that journey. Your presence has already altered the landscape of their emotional world, whether they acknowledge it or not. What they feel now, the quiet awareness, the lingering respect, and the recognition of your strength are markers of a bond that transcends control, circumstance, or timing. In every sense, you were never someone who could be erased or forgotten. You are a catalyst, a mirror, and a presence that has forever shifted the way they see connection, choice, and themselves. Some awakenings arrive late, yet they strike with a depth that early realizations never could. Time has a way of slowing down, of forcing reflection, of revealing truths that were invisible in the rush of life. And sometimes the person who seemed to avoid you, who appeared to step away, was never truly rejecting you at all. They were running not from you, but from the version of themselves that could love without fear, without hesitation, without pretense. They were fleeing the courage, the vulnerability, and the honesty that your presence reflected back to them. And now, after all the distance, all the avoidance, all the quiet longing, they finally see it. They finally recognize what they were hiding from. The realness of their own heart reflected in you. The person who avoided you wasn't rejecting you in the way it seems on the surface. They were confronting an internal truth they couldn't yet face. They felt the intensity of the connection, the rawness of emotions that defied their carefully constructed identity. Every glance, every word, every unspoken moment with you exposed a part of themselves they were afraid to accept. This isn't about indifference. It's about fear of vulnerability, fear of change, fear of confronting a self they had buried under routines, responsibilities, and expectations. The avoidance was never a measure of your value. It reflected the inner chaos your presence awakened within them. They created distance, believing it would silence the undeniable pull, but emotions do not follow logic. The more they resisted, the more their thoughts returned to you. Memories surfaced without warning, songs carried your presence, and quiet moments brought feelings they could not explain away. Type yes if you believe some connections can't be erased no matter the distance. Avoidance never erased the connection. It only made its significance impossible to ignore. Without realizing it, they began seeing themselves differently, recognizing patterns they had overlooked for years. Your courage, honesty, and emotional presence reflected the version of themselves they had been avoiding. You never chased, demanded, or manipulated. You simply existed, and that alone forced them to confront truths they could no longer escape. The distance and silence did not protect them. They only delayed the inevitable awakening. In quiet moments, empty relationships, and achievements that felt incomplete, they slowly realized what they had walked away from. They came to understand the connection was never forbidden because it was wrong, but because it was real and challenged the life they were living. Now they carry quiet awareness, respect, subtle regret, and admiration for your strength, patience, and refusal to chase. Comment: forbidden. If you felt the intensity of a bond that scared someone away, they see that what they walked away from wasn't just a connection. It was a mirror of themselves, reflecting a version of their own heart they had been too afraid to meet. And whether they return or remain silent, that reflection will never disappear. It has already changed them, just as it has changed the trajectory of your life. Some connections are not meant to be rushed. They are meant to unfold slowly, deliberately, and in alignment with awareness, rather than fear. Your role in this dynamic is not one of control or obligation. It is one of presence, of authenticity, of quiet power. The person who avoided you is experiencing the awakening you inspired. And whether they act on it or not, the impact is permanent. You were never invisible. You were never meaningless. You were a catalyst, a mirror, a turning point, and a lesson that revealed a truth they could no longer ignore. The more they reflect on you, the more they realize that avoidance was never about you. It was about them. They were running from the intensity of emotions that felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and uncontrollable. Being near you forced a reckoning with themselves, revealing the parts of their heart they had kept hidden even from their own awareness. Every moment with you slipped past their defenses, revealing vulnerability, longing, and honesty they were not ready to accept. Yet distance did not heal, erase, or protect them. It only created an empty space that your presence quietly continued to fill. Thoughts of you return unexpectedly during ordinary moments, in quiet routines, and in the silence where reflection becomes unavoidable. It is not loud longing, but a steady awareness they can no longer ignore. Slowly, they begin asking themselves why these thoughts remain and why something still feels missing. They realize this connection was never meant to be controlled, avoided, or contained, but recognized, honored, and learned from. That realization challenges their old patterns of fear and avoidance. They now see their retreat was not strength at all, but avoidance disguised as logic. True emotional growth, they understand, comes from facing intensity instead of running from it. Your presence became a mirror, revealing the courage, authenticity, and vulnerability they had refused to embrace. Now they face a choice: remain in avoidance and regret, or accept the lesson and become someone capable of loving honestly and without fear. They may carry quiet regret for the distance they created, but they also know some connections change a person forever. Looking back, they find new meaning in your conversations, and the silence that once felt safe now feels like a missed chance to truly live. Like if this awakening story gave you hope, and comment awakened below. They now see that your willingness to stand in your truth was never an attack on their freedom, but an invitation to greater honesty. Every attempt to return to their old routine only reminds them of the depth you brought compared to the shallow connections they once accepted. Avoiding you never resolved their inner conflict. It only made it louder in your absence. Your patience has quietly become the standard by which they measure everything else. Nothing they encounter matches the authenticity you brought into their life. They realize you never tried to change them, yet your presence inspired them to become better. This is where their real growth begins, even if it happens in complete isolation. As they reflect on their life, the emotional walls they built begin to crumble, and the pride that once guided their choices is replaced by a quiet longing for a genuine connection. Share this video so others can recognize the power of their own quiet presence. They now wish they had the maturity to meet you where you stood when the time was right. They understand that running from someone who truly sees them is a form of self-sabotage and a sign they were not ready for the love and understanding they wanted. Though this realization is heavy, it becomes essential to their growth, teaching them that true value is often recognized only after fear fades. You gave them a gift they did not know how to receive. Comment which moment of their realization hit you hardest, and subscribe for more messages on deep soul connections and emotional awakenings.